Christian. When I first became the pastor of this church, I began with what we believe. You need to know why you believe what you believe. We went through all the core doctrines of our faith and why we believe, but also some of the variations of other denominations that are out there. And so we talked about all of that. Then we sort of went into a study of the 7 churches, and the reason why is because if you fail to uphold what you believe, then there's a potential to lose the church. And that is what we see there in the 7 churches, where you must defend what you believe. With that understanding, we are now going to jump into what others believe. The reason why we're going to study what others believe is because you, number one, need to be able to defend why you believe what you believe. But each and every one of us are commanded to share our faith. And you need to know what other people believe to be able to share your faith. You need to know some of the hang-ups there. You need to have a good grasp and understanding of these other major religions in the world. And so that is what we're going to do. We're going to study some of the other major religions in the world. I enjoy this. This is something that I actually enjoyed. When I was in Bible college, I had classes on world religions. And we got to learn, in particular, like for the subject tonight and a couple others, we actually had their leaders come to our class and teach. And so tonight's lesson is on Islam. And I actually had an imam come and teach us for a week there in Bible college on what Muslims believe. And it was fascinating to me. And I'm hoping it'll be fascinating to you as well. And so that's what we're going to learn tonight, is about Muslims, the Islamic faith. What is it that they truly believe? With that understanding, y'all, it's a lot of information. And so I know it's a lot of information, and so it's sort of going to feel like you're drinking from a fire hydrant. But that's about the best way I know how to do it without making this year-long study. Because, I mean, let's be real. We study our scriptures every week. And not everybody in here would dare say they know all of it. And so we're going to try to cram an entire world religion into an hour, okay? And so you're only going to get the basics, but we're going to run through this, and so you can have at least a grasp on what it is they believe and how we as Christians can better represent our faith to them and share our faith to them. And so some general information real quick on them. Islam is the 2nd largest religion in the world. Other than Christianity, it is number 2. You need to know that there's 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. And so the odds are you're going to come across a Muslim at some point in time in your life, or you may know some now. And so there's 1.8 billion of them. They are on every single continent in the world. They were founded in Saudi Arabia, and they are predominantly in the Middle East. They are the majority in the Middle East, North Africa, Southern Europe, and the largest concentration is in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is where you find the majority of them, like in Indonesia. In Indonesia alone, there's 120 million Muslims. There's more Muslims in Indonesia than there is in all of Middle East, which is where they originated. And so it is a very fast-growing religion. And the reason why I can say that with confidence is it's a baby, y'all. When it comes to world religions, the Muslim faith is the newest of the world religions. We actually know a lot about them, to where we can sit here and debate about some of the origins of Christianity and all that good stuff. There's not much debate when it comes to Muslim faith because it's relatively new. It is the newest of the major religions of the world. Its founder was the Prophet Muhammad. Muhammad lived from 570 to 632 A.D. And so we know a lot about Muhammad, as you're going to see when we get into the history section and actually how Muslims were, or the Muslim religion was founded. What you need to know is the official writings. A little bit of a side note, y'all who have been with me for a while, you know I barely speak English. I speak pretty decent Southern English, but not proper English. With that understood, these words, the majority of them are in Arabic, and I'm not good at Arabic. And so I'm going to give you the best pronunciation I can for these names. There are no English words for them, and the reason why there's no English words for them is because Arabic is considered the sacred language, and there is no translation for them. And so these words only have the Arabic pronunciation, and so that's how I'm going to go through them. You can find some translations, like the first official writing, which is the main official writing for the Muslim faith, is the Quran. This is a copy of the Quran. It is an English translation. It was given to me by the imam who taught me Islam for a week. He gave all of us in the class a copy of the Quran, but he gave it with the understanding that this is an English translation. It's not an official translation. The only official translation of the Quran is in Arabic. If you want to read something that Allah inspired, it has to be in Arabic. It cannot be in English. It cannot be in any other language. And so this is just a translation. It's not considered authoritative at all. It's just to guide me to where I can eventually, hopefully, if I was to become a Muslim, would learn Arabic and could read the Quran in Arabic, because that's the only way to truly understand the religion, is to read it in Arabic. There's 114 chapters in the Quran. 114. There's 6,000 verses. It's about 3/4 of our New Testament. This entire book, their most sacred book of their writings, is about 3/4 of just our New Testament. So it's not a large book. It can be read relatively quickly. And so I have not read the entire Quran, but I've read over half of it because I need to know what they believe. I want to be able to share my faith. I want to know what it is that they believe. And so this is the Quran. It is their most sacred of writings, but it's not their only sacred of writings. They've actually got 5 more. The second most sacred is the Hadith. The Hadith is the recorded accounts or sayings of Muhammad. And so you have the Quran, and then you've got a book called the Hadith that people who knew Muhammad would write down some of the stuff he said. And so that is called a Hadith, and that's all about what Muhammad had to say that goes on top. It's like an addition to the Quran. The other thing that they have is sort of like, for us, the Talmud. The Talmud was the Pharisaical laws of the Old Testament. And so anybody that's ever read the Old Testament, you know there's tons and tons of laws in the Old Testament. And the Pharisees that we read about in the New Testament, they took all those laws and they would sort of explain them so people could understand exactly how not to break those laws. Well, they have that too in the Islamic faith. And we know this word because you've probably heard it on the news mentioned hundreds of times. It's called Sharia. And so the Sharia law, it's their legal interpretations of the Quran. So what they did is they went through the Quran and all the laws and commandments, they broke them down and put it in what's known as Sharia. That is the Sharia law. Those are the 3 most sacred writings in the Islamic faith: the Quran, the Hadith, and Sharia. But they've got 3 other ones. The problem with the 3 other ones is that they're corrupt. All right? They consider them sacred, and they believe that Allah played a role in the making and writing of them, but they're corrupted. They were messed up, and you'll understand as I dive into them. The first book that got corrupted is the Torah of Moses. We know it as the Pentateuch. It's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Islam holds to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They have no problems with it at all, except for one thing. They think the Jews corrupted it. And because the Jews corrupted the first 5 books of the Old Testament, they believe it is a sacred writing, but it's not authoritative because the Jews have messed it up. And so, but they do hold to the first 5 books of the Old Testament that we call the Pentateuch, or the books of Moses. They also hold to what they call the Zabar, and that is what we know as the Psalms. They believe the Psalms are sacred. The reason why is they believe King David was a prophet. And so majority of the Psalms were written by David. The only problem is, guess what? The Jews corrupted it. And so it is not authoritative, but yet they consider it from Allah. So they believe in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They believe in the Psalms. They also believe in one more thing called the Injil. That's how they refer to it, the Injil. We don't call it the Injil. We call it Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They believe in the 4 Gospels. They hold to the 4 Gospel accounts of the New Testament. The only problem is, guess what? Us Christians corrupted it, and it's not right. And so while they believe it is a sacred writing given and inspired by Allah, it is not to be authoritative. You can't really trust it because Christians have messed it up. And so they hold to the first 5 books of our Old Testament, they hold to the Psalms, and they hold to the 4 Gospels. The reason why I mention it is this. We had a very interesting discussion when I was in Bible college about it. There are many people that consider Islam to be the first Christian cult. And what I mean by that is this. They hold to the majority of stuff that we hold to. They just changed it, which is what a cult does. They say that our scriptures are not inspired, and so they need additional scriptures to enhance what it is they believe. That's no different than what you would find when it comes to Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. And so there are some people that believe that Islam is nothing more than a Christian cult because they have twisted so much of it. You'll see more of it as we dive into what it is they truly believe. Here's some key words for you. The first key word is Allah. Allah simply means God, okay? That's their name for God. And so in their translation, understand, God is one. And in Islam, it simply means submission. Allah means submission. And we are commanded, according to the Quran, to be submissive to Allah, who is the one and only God. Another word that you need to be sort of familiar with, and again, y'all, they ain't like there's going to be a test on it. Now, they tested me, and I may test you just for fun, just to see if anybody actually listens. But there are other words out there like fatwa. Fatwa. And fatwa is this. When I stand up on Sunday mornings, right there in the pulpit, what is it that I deliver to y'all? A message, a sermon. Now, is that message God's infallible, authoritative, perfect, inerrant word? It's a trick question. That's right. It is me reading His infallible, inerrant word and then discussing and talking about it. But guess what I am? I'm a human being and I'm fallible. That's why you need to test everything I ever say, because I am not God and I am not perfect. Well, that is fatwa. Fatwa is a non-authoritative, non-binding legal opinion that is given about the Quran. It's like a sermon. And so they have people that teach the Quran, and it's known as fatwa. They have things called mosque. Mosque is what we call a church. That's where they gather, where they will receive a fatwa, where they worship Allah. They worship in mosque. And instead of having a pastor or a priest, they're known as imams. Okay? So those are just some key words to help you in your communication with a Muslim when you come across one. And so Allah, fatwa, mosque, imam. All right, now to my favorite part, the history. How this actually came about. How this religion actually became one of the second largest religion in the world. Again, we know a lot about it. Y'all, Christians today still debate the exact year Jesus Christ was born. We don't know. There really ain't. We've got a really good idea that he was born within a time frame of about 10 years. But we really can't pinpoint it further than that. There's a lot of debate about it. There's a lot of debate about a lot of the stuff that is there in the New Testament. We can only get close to about 5 or 6 years because, y'all, that's a long time ago. That is not the case when it comes to the Quran because it is so new. It is such a baby when it comes to world religions. We know about it. For instance, we know the exact year Muhammad was born. They have it recorded for us. We don't have to guess at all. He was born in 570 AD. We know for a fact that when he was born in the Arabian Peninsula, and his father died prior to his birth. And so when Muhammad was born, his father was already dead, and his uncle took him under his wing. His mother would die when he was 6 years old. And so basically he was raised by his uncle. His uncle was a herdsman, a shepherd, and they would travel around the Middle East, and he would learn about all the religions in the Middle East. The primary two religions in the Middle East, Judaism and Christianity. And he would travel all through Samaria and all that area being with his uncle. At the age of 25, Muhammad caught the eye of a 40-year-old widow that was beyond wealthy. And so this 40-year-old widow saw Muhammad, she fell in love with him, and they got married. And so he went from being a herdsman, or actually an underling to his uncle who was a herdsman, to being one of the wealthiest people, and she lived in the city of Mecca. And so now he has prominence because of this wife that married him, this widow. After that, he would still shepherd with his uncle, and something happened. At the age of 40, Muhammad went into a trance. Okay? This is what happened. He went into a trance, and in the trance, the angel Gabriel came to him and recited to him the Quran. And in that, he explained to Muhammad that the Jews had completely messed up the Old Testament, the Christians have completely messed up the New Testament, and the Gabriel came to correct the world. And he was going to do it through Muhammad, which is really similar when you sort of look at other, again, cults. What happened when it comes to Joseph Smith and the Mormons? It was an angel that came to correct the Christian doctrines. It's the same thing when it comes to the Quran. An angel came. And let me sort of give you this little tidbit. Do y'all remember in the New Testament where Paul specifically says, even if an angel comes to you, because the devil can disguise himself as an angel of light, even if an angel comes with a different doctrine about Jesus Christ, what should you do with it? Get rid of it. Throw it away. That's exactly what happens. The very thing the Apostle Paul warned is what happens here. Muhammad believes an angel spoke to him. The reason why they believe it's authoritative, also you need to understand that Quran in Arabic means recite. Recite. And the reason why they believe it's authoritative is that Muhammad was illiterate. He could not read and could not write. And so everything the Archangel Gabriel gave him, he recited it to someone who would write it down, and that's the Quran. That's why they call it the Quran. It's a reciting of what Gabriel told Muhammad. Okay? So, that is what happens. He's sitting there in this cave and he has this trance. He receives the reciting of the Quran and he has someone write it down for him. Once he receives the Quran and this, he's emboldened. And so in the city of Mecca, where there's a lot of Jews, a lot of Christians, and even a lot of different kind of other religions in the world, it's a big plethora of religions. He stands up and starts street preaching. And just sort of like what happens in the New Testament with the Apostle Paul, when he would go around and would start preaching against idols and everything, what happened to the Apostle Paul? Y'all, they beat him with rods, threw him in prison, stoned him, everything. Same thing happens to Muhammad. They start to try to run him out of town. But they can't really do much with him because he is wealthy. Because of his wealth, they can't get him out of Mecca. The only problem is this. After 25 years of blissful marriage to his wife passes away, and he loses everything. And the moment he loses his wife, he loses his position there in Mecca, and they run him out of town. They get Muhammad out, and he has several followers that follow with him, and they run him out. It was in 620 A.D. that we know he was forced out of the city of Mecca. he would flee to a city called Medina. Medina is a city that's just north of Mecca, and there he would rally troops to himself. He would rally people to believe the Quran, how he had received this, and so they started a giant war. And so for about 12 years, these two cities fought each other, and eventually Muhammad won. Muhammad would take over the city of Mecca, and Mecca would become the most holy city in all of Islam. When they ran him out, they call it the Hijra, which is how the Muslim calendar is formed. It's all like, for instance, we do everything BC and AD, before Christ and after death. And the Muslim calendar is now AH, meaning after Hijra, which means the time he was forced out of Mecca. So their whole calendar is based on this event where he had to flee the city of Mecca, and he would eventually go back and conquer it. So they end up conquering the city of Mecca about 630 AD. The reason why Mecca is such a big deal is because of a temple that's inside of it. Inside the city of Mecca, there is one major temple, and inside this temple, if you ever look online, you can see it. There's a giant arena, and there's a box, a huge box inside the arena. Inside this box is a giant black stone. Most scientists believe it is a meteorite that fell from heaven, but we don't really know because it is too sacred, and they won't let nobody test it. And so you can't get in there to test what this stone is. But they have built this altar around the stone. The reason why is if you read the Quran, it is that stone where Adam was formed. It was that stone where Abraham worshiped God. And it was that stone where Abraham sacrificed his son Ishmael to God, Allah. Now, did anybody catch what I just said? It was Ishmael, according to the Quran. Again, that's the corruption. In our Old Testament, it's not Ishmael that was sacrificed, it's Isaac that was sacrificed. They believe the Jews corrupted the Old Testament, and so they believe it was Ishmael that did it. That is the reason why Muslims and Jews are still killing each other today. Okay? They are still fighting over this. They've been fighting over it for centuries. But Muhammad, through the Quran, teaches all this happened at this rock. And so this rock is now enshrined in a temple in the city of Mecca and is the holiest relic and city in all of Islam. Mecca is the center, the epicenter of the Islamic faith. And so it's a big deal. All right, so up to this point, all the writings say and agree the same thing, that Muhammad had that wife for 25 years, but the moment his wife died, he was no longer a monogamous man, okay? Muhammad would go on and take multiple wives after that. He would end up with a total of 12 wives that we know of. He had at least 12. We know of about 4 or 5 other concubines, and there were also women that followed him that were referred to as worshipers. And you can only imagine what they did with him. But regardless, he has 12 wives. Why is that important? Because the Quran is clear, and we'll talk more about it when we get into the Islamic theology. You're only allowed 4. You're only allowed 4 wives. But Muhammad had 12. Understand that just in our theology, Jesus Christ is sinless. Okay? He never had a sin. Nobody could ever point to any sin that Jesus ever committed. They claim the same about Muhammad. He was sinless. The only problem is the Quran says you can have 4 wives, and he had, we know for a fact, 12. And none of the Arabic scholars debate that, because it is history. Again, we know for a fact he had at least 12. But they'll get around it. The way they get around and make this not a big deal is that they'll say that his wives, they were all widows. And he was a very compassionate man. And in that culture, widows didn't have anything, and so he would feel sorry for them, and he would marry them so he could provide and care for them, because Muhammad was very compassionate. That's the way they get around him having so many wives. They say that none of them were virgins. The only problem is we know that ain't true either. And the reason why we know that's not true is because of one wife in particular. One wife in particular he married at the age of 9. She was 9. He consummated when she was at the age of 10. And so she was a virgin. And so she was not a widow. For us in our Western world, we cringe at that. We can't even wrap our mind around it. But you got to understand, this is in the 500s, and in the Middle East, this was normal back then. This was not a crazy thing. In fact, in the Middle East, they still will promise young girls to men that are much older. Even in our New Testament, y'all, the reason why most people believe Joseph was dead by the time Jesus started to teach and to preach is because Joseph was probably much older than Mary. Because in the Middle East, that's just culturally normal. But here, he married a girl when she was 9, consummated at the age of 10. And so that whole thing about them all being widows just simply is not true. We know that not to be true. Another sin that we know he committed when it comes to his wives is this. In the Middle East, it's no different for us in our New Testament. Adoption is a big deal, okay? If you adopt someone, they are legally your child. And in particular, in the Middle East, they don't play with that. That's why it's a really awesome thing when it says that we have been adopted by God. There is no separation. If you look at that, the Romans treated it the same way. Legally binding, they are their children. And so Muhammad adopted one of his followers as his son, and he gave his first cousin to him as a wife. The only problem is he died. And so he felt sorry for her, and he took his first cousin as his wife, and that's against the Quran. He's not allowed to do that. And so we know for a fact of 2 sins that he committed, but they always try to get around the fact that he did it. He would eventually die at 632 AD. After he died, they had already gained control over much of the Arabian Peninsula. And when I say gain control, they took it by the sword. They took all of it. I think I've mentioned this before. The Christianity takes a lot of blame for the Crusades. And don't get me wrong at all. What the Christians did during the Crusades was bad. But you've got to understand history to understand why the Crusades took place. The Crusades were in response of this. What happened is when Islam started to grow, they took over the Middle East and they killed all the Christians in Jerusalem. They drove them out. It would eventually become like the Ottoman Empire. They would take over all of North Africa. They would take all of Spain, and they were taking half of Europe as we know it today. And then all of a sudden, the Christians rallied, and the only way to get people to fight back then was to make it, quote unquote, a holy war. And so it became a holy war between Christians and Muslims. And that's why the Crusades took place. And so don't allow our culture or our historians to try to convince you that big bad Christians ran off into Jerusalem and just started killing people for no reason. It is not the case. Jews and Christians and Muslims lived in peace and harmony in Jerusalem until Islam took it over. And they took it over by the sword. What we refer to as Jihad has been going on for a long time as they slaughtered anybody that would not bow the knee to Allah. Okay? It was a response. It's not a right response. Again, do not walk out of here and say, well, my preacher thinks the Crusades was okay. That is not true. They never should have done that. But again, the problem is that we allow our politics to influence our religion, and it should never happen. And so the politicians, the kings back then, used religion to garner more soldiers, and they made it a quote-unquote holy war. So that's how all that ends up. But the thing is, Muhammad dies in 632 AD, but guess what happens when your main leader dies? It's a power vacuum, okay? Just like when Alexander the Great died, they divided up Alexander the Great's kingdom into 4 different little mini empires. They took his 4 leaders and divided them up in little pieces of land. Same thing happens with Muhammad. They take his 4 primary guys that were with him, and they divide up Muhammad's lands. And they call these guys the caliphs. The problem is, which caliph was the most powerful? And so a civil war breaks out in Islam because one of these caliphs has got to be the next one, the next big Muhammad. And so they're all fighting over who is going to be the next Muhammad or the greatest one. Every Muslim that follows one of the 4 caliphs are known as Sunni Muslims. If you're a Sunni Muslim, you follow one of the teachings of the 4 caliphs, which is the 4 guys that followed Muhammad. But that's not the only Muslims. There are 90% of Muslims in this world are Sunni Muslims. But there's 9% of Muslims in this world that are not Sunni Muslims. They're known as Shiite Muslims. The reason why you may have heard about Shiite Muslims is because in the first Iraq war, Saddam Hussein, when he tested out his weapons of mass destruction, guess where he tested them? On villages that were Shiite Muslims, because Sunni Muslims will kill every Shiite Muslim they find. They're considered apostates. They do not follow them. Shiite Muslims follow the son-in-law of Muhammad. And so they believe that it was his son-in-law that took the position or title of Muhammad's, or was the next great leader of Islam, and only 9% of Muslims in the world follow that. They're the Shiites. And then the rest, 90% Sunnis, follow these caliphs. It is one of the most rapid spreading religions in the world, but I'm just sort of going to be real with you for a second. It's easy to spread a religion when you give them the option of dying or convert. And that's exactly what they did. If you do not convert and put your faith in Allah, they just simply killed you or enslaved you. And so they took over the Middle East like that. There was nothing to it for them. Everyone eventually came over, and that's why it's still such a powerful religion today. Notice I said 9% of Muslims in the world are Shiite, 90% are Muslims. That leaves 1% of Muslims in the world. 1% of Muslims in the world is really, really divided up. There's multiple little denominations that are out there, but they're not really significant. There's only one little branch of Muslims that is significant for us because they're found in the United States. And it's really only in the United States that you will find these Muslims. You'll understand when I dive into this branch of Muslims real quick. It's known as the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam. It's also known as the Black Muslim Movement. This one we know a whole lot about because it didn't really start until the 1913. In 1913, in the city of Detroit, this movement got started by a man by the name of Timothy Drew. Timothy Drew changed his name to Noble Drew Ali. He taught that African Americans were originally from Morocco and have been enslaved by what he refers to as the white devils and calls for the destruction of all Caucasians. In 1919, Timothy Drew Ali died, and he was replaced by Wallace Farad. Wallace Farad would change his name to Muhammad. And he says that he was the reincarnation of Timothy Drew. And so it wasn't a problem that Timothy Drew died because he got reincarnated in this other guy. And this other guy led the Nation of Islam here, the Black Muslim movement in America. And so he claimed, again, the name of Muhammad to be Ali, reincarnated. He's the one that officially formed the religion known as the Nation of Islam, and it was founded in Detroit in 1930. All right? In 1935, 5 years after he founded the religion, he disappears. He pulls a Jimmy Hoffa. Nobody knows where he is. Nobody has a clue. We still today have no clue what happened to him, Wallace Farad. No clue. most people believe that Farad was dispatched or removed or killed or assassinated by the man that would replace him. His name was Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad came and took over control in 1935 after the disappearance of Wallace Farad. Elijah was a little bit different. He is the one that gave them the more tarnished understanding of their religion. He had terrible rhetoric, and I'll give you an example of it. Elijah taught this. This is actually in the Nation of Islam, the American version. That mad black scientists created all whites and were designed to rule for only 6,000 years, which just so happened to end in 1914, the year that Noble Drew Ali started the religion, and all whites are to be destroyed now. That's exactly what he taught. He would be in control for a long time, but a man rose up in 1950 and became prominent through 1950 to 1960 by the name of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a part of the Nation of Islam, but he decided he wanted to learn about Islam itself, the world religion. And so he leaves Detroit and he goes to Mecca. And when he goes on that pilgrimage to Mecca, he falls in love with Islam. And he realizes that what the Nation of Islam was teaching in Detroit had nothing in common with Islam. Two polar opposite religions. And so Malcolm X comes back to the United States and he starts teaching the Quran. And he tries to get away from this rhetoric about white people being created by mad scientists and all this stuff. And that really upset Elijah Muhammad. He did not like Malcolm X to the point that in 1970, 1970, Malcolm X would eventually be assassinated by his own people, Elijah Muhammad being the one that started it. And so he ends up killing Malcolm X. The problem is when Malcolm X dies, he becomes a martyr, and everybody starts to follow Malcolm X's teachings. And so now there's a schism between the Nation of Islam on who you're going to follow, Elijah Muhammad or Malcolm X. Muhammad dies, his son takes over in 1975, and when his son takes over, he calls an end for the halt of all harsh rhetoric. He also allows non-black people to become a part of the religion. Prior to this time, you had to be black to be a part of the religion. He allows everybody of every color of nation to come in, and everybody rejoiced except for a few. Some of them did not like it. The prominent leader that did not like it broke away, and he founded the Nation of Islam again in 1978, and he is still speaking today. You will recognize his name. It's Louis Farrakhan. Farrakhan is the one that took up all of Elijah Muhammad's teaching, and that's why when you do listen to Louis Farrakhan, if you've ever listened to him, he still refers to us as white devils. Because he takes all his teachings from Elijah Muhammad. That is the 1% of Muslims you may come across in the United States. The rest of them hold to the Quran, okay? But there are some that don't, so that's it, right there. Now let's dive into the belief system, all right? Now that you're aware of the history of Islam in the United States and around the world, we'll jump into what they believe. Number one is God. They simply call him Allah. And in their religion, Allah is all-powerful. He is sovereign over all things, just as our God is all-powerful and sovereign over all things. The major difference is this: you cannot know Allah. There's only one way to know Allah, and you can know His will, and His will is in this book. You can have no personal relationship with Him at all. He has nothing to do with you at all. He gave you His will in this book, and if you do not follow this, you have nothing to do with Allah. Okay? You can have no personal relationship was the exact opposite of Christianity. God desires to have a relationship with us. He wants us and to know us and us to know Him. That is not what they teach when it comes to Allah. They hold to angels. They have no problem with angels. Again, how did they get Quran in the first place? Gabriel. They even have the same names. They call Satan Shaitan. They call demons jinns. Okay? And so they have demons, the head demon, Satan, same as our theology. Again, they have taken the majority of Judaism and Christianity and just put a twist on it. That's why some people refer to it as the original cult, because they still hold to pretty much a lot of the same stuff we do. Again, they have their own 4 inspired books, and the other 3 are Christian books that we actually hold to. Muhammad is the key prophet. But there's 28 other prophets in Islam. They recognize 28 other prophets besides Muhammad, and you're going to recognize some of them. They believe that Adam is a prophet, Noah was a prophet, Abraham's a prophet, Moses is a prophet, David's a prophet, Jonah is a prophet, and Jesus is a prophet. Jesus is the Christ. They have no problem with that at all. They will call Jesus the Messiah. When you read the book of the Quran, you will find Jesus mentioned far more, in fact, double the times of Muhammad. He is one of the main prophets. They have no issues with Jesus being the main prophet or the Messiah or the Christ. Where they have a problem with it is where they believe Christians have twisted it. They don't believe that he was God in the flesh. They believe that he was God's son, but he was created like all sons were, okay? And so they have no problem with him being God's son. They also do not believe he was crucified. They believe that he was nailed to the cross, but God took Jesus off the cross and put Judas in his place. And so it was Judas that ended up crucified and dead, not Jesus. They do not believe Jesus ever died, nor was he ever resurrected, but they do believe he ascended into heaven and is at the right hand of Allah today. And so you can start to see the similarities, but some of the major differences as well. That really starts to hurt our Christian doctrine, because without Jesus dying, there is no forgiveness. There is no blood. It's a big deal. And so that's why they deny it. It cannot happen. But they hold to 28 of them. They hold to end times as well. They believe the earth will be destroyed. They believe that everyone will stand before Allah. And when you stand before Allah, you better be ready to admit that he is Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. If you get to heaven and you mention that Jesus is the Christ and the main prophet that you have put your faith in, you will not get into heaven. It has to be Muhammad that gets you there, or that taught you about Allah. Another issue when it comes to the end times is it's no different than Our Lady Liberty. How many of you know what I mean when I say Lady Liberty? It's a statue that you'll find in most courthouses or courtrooms. And what is Lady Liberty? She's always pictured with a blindfold. She's got a sword in one hand. What's she got in the other? Scales. Why? Because your good better outweigh your bad. And that's exactly how Allah is pictured in the Quran. Your good better outweigh your bad. There is no promise of heaven. There is no security in heaven. Your good must outweigh your bad. If you have more sin in your life than you have good deeds in your life, you will not make it into heaven. And so when you get before Allah at the end of time, you better recognize Muhammad, and you better hope your sins are not as more than your good deeds. Because if that is the case, you're not getting in whether you know Muhammad or not. Whether you recognize Allah or not, it does not matter. Your good must not outweigh your bad. They hold to predestination. No problem with that at all. Again, in the Quran, Allah is absolutely sovereign. The moment you are born, you have already been determined, your existence and your eternity, all of it's already figured out. That's why the common saying that you'll find in all Islamic countries that hold to it is this: if it's Allah's will. Most Muslims will say that repeatedly, if it's Allah's will, because he's already determined it all. It's all predestined in them. Sin. When it comes to the Quran, sin is a little bit different than the way we view it. We as Christians, as we've already discussed what it is we believe we were all born into sin. From the moment we were conceived in the womb, we were sinners by birth. We have what is referred to as Adam's sin nature. Every single one of us have it. They do not hold to Adam's sin nature. They do not hold to that one bit. They believe all human beings are created perfect and holy and sinless. There is no original sin at all when it comes to the Quran. The reason why people commit sin according to the Quran is because human beings are weak and forgetful. And because human beings are weak and forgetful of their Creator, they fall into sin. It's not because of their nature. It's just they don't remember who God is or Allah is. They hold to a strict diet. Y'all do realize that Christians are the only ones that eat pork, right? So every time you eat bacon or a good old country ham for breakfast, you need to realize we're the only ones. They do not allow any pork at all. Obviously, that comes from the Jewish Old Testament. Jews don't hold to pork or aren't allowed to eat pork either. They do not have any intoxicating drinks at all. Like if you go to nations or countries that hold to the Sharia law, you will find no alcohol in that country at all. They may be hiding it somewhere, but they ain't selling it openly because it's not allowed, just like you won't find any bacon anywhere either. So no pork, no intoxicating drinks, and they strive to remain healthy. Most Muslims strive to remain in health. It's a big deal for them. They eat healthy and they strive to live healthy. Marriages, when it comes to the Quran, it's interesting. And what's interesting is Muslims struggle just like Christians do when it comes to the culture, okay? If you are a Muslim living in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, then they have no problem practicing what the Quran teaches. Again, what does the Quran teach? You're allowed 4 wives. They practice polygamy. But in the Eastern or in the Western world, especially in Europe and America, that don't fly. People don't like polygamy in America, and they don't like polygamy in Europe, at least not the way the Quran does it or speaks about it. And so those in America try to practice monogamy. But according to the Quran, you're allowed 4 wives. Men, you're allowed 4 wives. Women, you're allowed 1 husband, and you can share him with 2 or 3 others. But you're only allowed 1. But that is what they practice. So it really depends on where you live on whether you're going to be a polygamist or a monogamist. Women do not have the same rights as men. They are viewed completely different in the Quran. Men are allowed to divorce their wives. Women cannot divorce their husbands for no reason at all. If you do divorce your wife, then you will simply be stoned or beheaded. They're just not treated the same. And I've said this before in sermons. Y'all, our Western culture may mock Christianity, but if it was not for Christianity, our world would be completely different. The very things that promotes women's rights is Christianity. Because if not, go look at the Middle East and Southeast Asia where there are no women's rights whatsoever. All those that mock Christianity better be praising Christianity because that's what changed everything. Those that practice the Christian faith, because in Christianity, men and women are created equal in the eyes of God, not the same when it comes to Allah. They're 2 completely different things. All right, the pillars of faith. There's 5 pillars of faith in Muslims. They have 5 pillars of faith. Number 1 of their pillars of faith, or their key doctrines, is the Shahada. The Shahada. It is this: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. It's a saying, and they need to say it constantly, and they need to mean it. It's one thing to say it, but you better mean it with your heart. Again, when you get into heaven, you're standing before Allah, that's the phrase you better utter, because you're not getting in unless you utter that phrase. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. If you don't say that, you're not getting in. That is the number 1 pillar of the faith. It's their main doctrine. You have to admit there's only one Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Got to understand that. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is the Salat. The Salat is another word for prayer. Anybody that knows Muslims knows one thing about Muslims: their prayers. They pray, and they pray a lot. And the reason why is because if you don't hold to these 5 pillars, you're not getting into heaven. Again, Allah has the scales. And these 5 things, if you're not doing them, you're not getting into heaven. So you have to do these 5 things all the time, or you're not going to ever get in there. One of the second pillar is prayer, and that requires prayer 5 times a day. They have prayer 5 times a day. They have it at dawn, they have it at noon, they have it at mid-afternoon, they have it at sunset, and before you go to sleep. So 5 prayers a day. In the prayers, you're supposed to ceremonially clean yourself, and you are to pray in the direction of Mecca, the holy city. And so that is what you have to do 5 times a day your entire life. That is what is required if you want to enter into heaven. They have what is known for them in Arabic as Swam. We know it as Ramadan. Ramadan is their holy month. Again, if you follow news at all, you'll hear people talk about Ramadan. My iPhone will tell me it's Ramadan. I'm not even Muslim, but it notifies me it's officially Ramadan. What Ramadan is this: they're not allowed to allow anything to pass through their lips during the month of Ramadan. They cannot drink anything, and they cannot eat anything. Nothing during Ramadan. It's a holy month, and they are thanking Allah for the Quran. That's what Ramadan is for. They're thanking God for the revelation of the Quran. And so they can't eat or drink anything for the month of Ramadan. The only problem is you can't survive without eating and drinking. And so during the month of Ramadan, you are to fast all things, including sex, during the month of Ramadan, during daylight. But once the sun goes down, party it up. It don't matter. But during daylight hours in the month of Ramadan, you can't eat, you can't drink, no fun whatsoever. But once that sun sets, it's on. That's the month of Ramadan. That is one of the pillars of the faith. The other pillar is the zakat. The zakat. We, in Christian terms, refer to it as a tithe, except it's not a tithe. For them, it's not a tenth. For them, it's 2.5%, and that's of your yearly earnings. If you do not give 2.5% back to your church, then you will never go to heaven. And so 2.5% of all income goes to the oppressed and for the advancement of the Islamic faith. They call it the zakat. The other and the last of the pillars of the faith is known as the Hajj. The Hajj. The Hajj is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and it's a big deal. Once in your lifetime, at some point, if you're a Muslim, you must go to Mecca. And you go to Mecca and you put on a solid white ceremonial robe, and you are to walk around that black stone 7 times. And you can Google it, go on the internet and look. You can see it, and they're there by the millions. They will go one time in their life to walk around that stone 7 times. If you do not do that, you cannot go to heaven. You have to walk around it 7 times. And everybody is dressed the same because in Allah's eyes, we're all the same. And that's why they wear the ceremonial robe. The only problem is that they recognize that some people, because of birth defects or extreme poverty, cannot make it to Mecca in their lifetime. But that's up to Allah. All right? He's the one that determines if you're too sick to go or too poor to go. And so you don't know if you're going to get into heaven, and he's going to consider you poor enough or sick enough until you get to heaven. And guess what? Pretty late. And so most people don't take that chance, and they'll go. And that's why you'll see some of them crawling, because they don't even have legs, and they're trying to crawl around it 7 times because they really want to get to heaven. And they got to get around that stone 7 times. But if you are too sick or too poor, you must designate another human being to go in your stead, and they will sign a book that they went around 7 times in that person's name. And so they just find somebody that's healthy and wealthy to go in their stead if you're too sick. But again, Allah is the one that determines that. And if you want to get into heaven, you better make sure you're very poor and very, very sick. Because if not, you're not going to get in. There is another pillar of the faith, but it's not an actual considered a pillar of the faith, but it's a big deal, and I'll talk about it last because we know about it, and it is known as the Jihad. The Jihad you hear mentioned a lot on the news, and y'all, it really depends. There's 2 variations of the Jihad. Now, when I was in Bible college, the imam that came and talked to me, he was a westernized, moderate imam. Okay? They did not allow a radical imam to come into our Bible college. He was a moderate imam. The moderate Western Muslims, they believe that jihad is an eternal struggle, that you will have an eternal struggle, like a spiritual struggle, your entire life, and they refer to it as jihad. The problem is they're not all moderates. You have the extremes as well, and the extremes do not see the jihad as an eternal struggle, it's an external struggle. And that external struggle means that you must bring the whole world under the faith of Islam. And so that's why when you'll hear some terrorists and you'll hear on the news about jihad, those are the ones that believe it's an external struggle. There are Muslim factions that believe it's an internal struggle. And so it really depends on the Muslim you're talking to on what jihad means. But that's what it means, either an internal battle or an external battle for the faith. Okay? It's always a battle for the faith. The reason why it's a big deal is it is the only guarantee into heaven. The only guarantee. And so your entire life, if you're a Muslim, you don't know if you're getting into heaven, but there is one way that you know for a fact you can get into heaven. If you've lived a horrible life and you know there's no way you're going to get into heaven because you're so bad, there is one way, and that's to die in the name of defense of Allah, which is the external jihad. And so if you will sacrifice your life in defense of Allah, you're guaranteed heaven. And not only that, according to the Hadith, you will gain 72 virgins when you get in there. And so if you sacrifice your life for the faith of Islam, you are guaranteed into heaven regardless of how evil you lived your life or whether you did the 5 pillars of the faith or not. You're automatically into heaven. Because of it, and on top of it, you get 72 virgins. Now, if you're a female, again, you don't get 72 virgin men. You don't get nothing. You just get heaven and be happy that you're in heaven. But again, men and women are treated different in Islam. Here's the Christian response, the reason why we are going through this. Our goal is to share our faith with everybody. That's a commandment from Christ. We are commanded to share our faith. So how do you do it? Y'all, there's billions of Muslims in this world. And now you know what it is they believe. How do you share your faith with them? The odds are you're going to come across Muslims. And you need to know, number one, why you believe what you believe, but it really helps to know what they believe because it makes you a better communicator on why you believe what you believe. And so let's talk about it. Number one is this. When you come across a Muslim and the Lord allows you to share your faith, to get to know them. Y'all, the imam that came and talked to us, he loved talking to us. That's somebody you can share your faith with. They're out there. And in fact, in America is the best place to share your faith with a Muslim. Because most Muslims in America are moderates. They're not the radicals. Now, there are radical Muslims in the United States. But the majority of Muslims in the United States are moderate. They're not the harsh ones that you see. So you have an opportunity to share your faith. And so be ready to do it. When you do, guess what you do not lead with? The Trinity. Don't even go there. Don't start with it. And in fact, let that be one of the things that you end with. Don't start with it. And the reason why is because their main commandment is this. Allah is one. And if you begin with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the triune God, they are going to reject it immediately. So don't start with the Trinity. Y'all, most Christians have a hard time understanding the Trinity. I like talking about the Trinity, and it's wonderful news to me. But y'all, I've been studying the scriptures for a long time, but even I can't explain it perfectly. And so don't even start with the Trinity because it's not going to work with them. You start with the basics and not the Trinity. Because you're going to lose a Muslim immediately if you start with the triune God. Because in their mind, there is one God and it's only Allah. Okay? Along that line, let me say this too. Don't get hung up on the word Allah. Do not get hung up on it. And the reason why I'm saying that is this. Y'all, when I refer to God in English, there is God, Jehovah, the one true God, and then there are other gods. We call them idols. Now, how do I distinguish in English between God, Jehovah, and God, idol, in English? Using the word God, how do you distinguish between those two? Capital G. It's the same word. Whether I'm talking about a false God or a true God, in English, there's only one word for God. God. Guess how many words for God there is in Arabic? One. And it's Allah. So don't get hung up on it. Just because they say Allah doesn't mean they're not willing to discuss and talk about Jehovah. Because in Arabic language, there's only one word for God. So don't get caught up on it. It was a tough deal for me when I was in Bible college because I was like, man, but Allah's not it. Well, in their language, there ain't no other word. So you got to go with that word, okay? So don't get caught up on the word Allah. Something else that you need to understand is when you are witnessing to a Muslim, use the Gospels. You heard me say it earlier. They do believe they're inspired. They believe in Jesus Christ. They believe in the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. They believe that Jesus lived a sinless life. They believed he's the Christ, and they believe he's the Messiah. The problem is they don't believe he was crucified, dead, and resurrected. That's the point they don't believe, but they believe all the other stuff. So use the gospel accounts. When I share my faith with a Muslim, I go to Jesus because Jesus is in this book more than any other prophet. And so they'll listen to what Jesus has to say because he is a prophet and second only to Muhammad. And so he's a big-time prophet. So go to what Jesus says. And what I always do is I go to exactly what Jesus said. Do you know who else is a prophet they hold to? Jonah. So go to the passage where Jesus says, like Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, so I'm going to be in the belly of the earth for 3 days, and then I'm going to come back. What was Jesus talking about? The resurrection. Well, they don't hold to a resurrection, but they hold to Jonah and they hold to Jesus. Perfect place to start. Start in the Gospels. Start with Jesus. Start with what he actually said about the temple, the fact you can destroy it in 3 days and then bring it back. Start with that. Do not start with Paul. Don't start with Peter. Don't start with any of the apostles because they don't hold them authoritative. They think they're corrupt. Go to the Gospels. Start there. Don't waste your time with the apostles. Start with the gospel accounts because that's what they hold authoritative. Also, this. Let me show you something. All right? When you go to them and you're sharing them with the Word of God, do not use a Bible like this. And what do I mean by that? What do you see about my Bible? You see anything different about it? What, the red and the black, but what's all around the red and the black? Writings. That's it. In my Bible, there ain't nothing but a whole lot of scribbling, notes, circled words, everything. I write my Bible up constantly. Do not use a Bible like this when you witness to a Muslim. And what I mean by that is not that the Bible's bad, but try to use one that you ain't written in. And the reason why is because for them, God's words are holy. Same with a Jew. We'll talk about Judaism eventually in this series as well. Jews do not mark up God's word. Muslims do not mark up God's word. And so if you're going to share your faith with them, don't use a Bible that's all marked up because they are going to think, man, you don't care nothing about that. That ain't sacred at all. Their Quran is not marked up. Because to them, it is absolutely holy inspired. So don't do that. Last thing is this. Focus on grace. Focus on grace. Y'all, you know what's wonderful about Christianity? I'm guaranteed heaven not because of how good I am. I'm guaranteed heaven because of how good God is. How good Jesus is. He lived a sinless life, and he gave his sinless life for my sinful life. I get into heaven, and I'm guaranteed heaven because of grace. It's not about my works. It's about Jesus. For them, they spend their entire life striving to get into heaven. Y'all have heard me say this before when it comes to different world religions. That's why I like talking about and studying other world religions. Y'all, I wish schools would teach world religions, because then everybody would know that there is one religion that stands head above all other religions in the world, and that's Christianity. Because in Christianity, God came to us and gave his life for us, and every other religion, the Quran being one, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, all of them, you got to work your way to God. You got to earn your way up there. Not in Christianity. It's completely flipped. And it's the only religion in the world that is that way. Every one of them are works-based. So focus on grace. Focus on the assurity of heaven, because they don't have that. There is no assurity of heaven in Islam unless you die as a martyr for Allah. It's the only assured way to get into heaven. So focus on grace. Questions about Islam.